Company of Heroes 3 is out, 16 years from the first game. Rather than innovating, it feels like Relic's goal was to deliver a solid game that plays like the first one as the quality of life changes of the second while easing up on the monetization. However, good intentions alone don't make good video games.
Unit ready. That's a question.
In brief, for those not familiar, what is Company of Heroes? It's a World War II real-time strategy game where you get resources via map control, make new units with resources, and use those units to gain more map control. You're meant to keep your units alive by retreating and reinforcing them, or repairing them if they're vehicles. There are 3 resources: manpower, which is spent for all units, ammo, which is used to pay for offensive abilities or squad upgrades, and fuel, which is used to unlock new units and buy vehicles. Now that everyone's caught up to speed, let's start talking about the single player content. This time the game shipped with 2 campaigns. One of them follows Rommel and the German Africa Corps in the early war. It's a traditional mission-based Company of Heroes campaign. The 8 levels follow real events in the war and there's a variety of scenarios. A little short, but it's not bad. What's funny is that the devs got cold feet about having a German campaign in the current year, so they prefaced it with "This is actually about the Jews, trust us." The missions themselves are 100% about the German forces and their plans.
We strike now. Take the lines back and go to bed well fed.
Thanks to you, a city that was once under siege for 241 days has fallen in one morning. But Berlin is not here with their boots on the scalding sand. We are, and the mere sandstorm is not enough to slow us down.
But after every mission, there's 2 tangentially related cutscenes following 2 Jewish locals. A guy that joins the British army, and his daughter that, I don't know, because her cutscenes routinely crash the game, so I had to skip them. And if the game crashes during the final cutscene, you will have to redo the whole mission. The second campaign is set on the Italian front and is very different. For once, it doesn't crash at the end of every mission, just some of them. It also has a meta layer. They try to represent command over the whole theater, with you controlling companies on the ground, the Navy and the Air Force. The idea is sound. If a game is good, all you need is to add context to skirmishes to make an enjoyable campaign. It feels like they tried emulating the Ardennes Assault campaign from the second game, but this time you have more stuff to juggle, so it's better, right? In 4 hours of this campaign, I played 2 story missions and a lot of incredibly easy, no challenge, uneventful skirmish missions. Most of them are mercifully short, especially the ones where there are actually scenarios tasking you to defend or attack some structures. But this campaign is mostly just slaughtering the unchallenging AI. There is an auto-resolve feature on the campaign map, but I don't understand it. Every company, friendly or enemy, has different unlocked units, abilities, upgrades and call-ins, but on the skirmish map, it doesn't matter that I'm fighting an elite armored company with a rookie airborne company, the match is still going to end way before tanks hit the field. It's a skirmish against a Company of Heroes AI one-on-one where you start with elite infantry, of course you're going to win. Sometimes there are tank reinforcements as parts of a scripted event, and they have some variety in how you win the skirmishes. But the AI is so bad that even if they manage to push you back, they forget to neutralize the points that will lose them the game. So while they tried to have an interesting layer, this campaign ends up being tedious because the skirmish AI is so terrible. Not only it's worse than Ardennes Assault, this feels worse than Soulstorm. But if you have more patience than me for this kind of stuff, you might enjoy it, especially if you like playing video games with like a podcast in the background, so I wouldn't say it's objectively bad. It's just something that I personally didn't enjoy. For this review specifically, I put it aside. I'll give it another shot later on, and if it picks up, I'll let you know in the comments. Those were the campaigns. Not great, but not the worst. Does the multiplayer content make up for their shortcomings? Well, Company of Heroes 3 launched with 4 whole factions instead of the standard 2. And besides the content, there are some improvements that this game has over the other 2. like the DLC commander being replaced with a Company of Heroes 1 system where every faction has 3 doctrines with branches to spend command points on, although the UI for equipping different doctrines is in the game, so I can't say for certain that we're never getting DLC commanders. There's also a line of sight indicator, a toggleable auto-reinforce option on the base, team colored abilities on the minimap, auto-building text structures for all factions, which doesn't always work, and rebindable hotkeys. There's only a handful of new features. Elevation just makes some parts of the map more defensible. It's not the most important thing, but it's neat that you need to keep an eye on the terrain. Side armor is a way to soft counter heavily armored vehicles by attacking them from different angles. High frontal armor is still a very impactful advantage, but now rear armor hits only really occur if the pathfinding is screwing up, so it's actually more difficult to envelop and kill a heavy tank. There's also towing, which is better than having to use immobile emplacements, but it's really clunky.
We're receiving. We're towing that. Once again, the gears have the sector. But after seeing the penalty,
As you might have guessed, this game isn't perfect, but I want to keep my complaints for later. For now, let's talk factions. The Americans and the Wehrmacht are clearly inspired by their Company of Heroes 1 counterparts. Not only their bases look very similar, they also copied some mechanics. The Americans now have their support weapons split between different tiers, which isn't ideal in team games, but they can skip pretty much any structure they want and supplement skipped units with doctrinal ones. They also have side techs that unlock new upgrades, fire support or units. Other than that, it's pretty similar to its Company of Heroes 1 counterpart, with extra options here and there like chaffy tanks, bazooka squads or specialized half tracks. My go-to strategy is using paratroopers instead of riflemen, just because having to use fuel to make them decent in combat slows your tech up considerably. Conversely, when playing as the Wehrmacht, you can start by building a Kettenkrad, immediately upgrading it and getting extra income from the point it captures. It feels a little broken. Anyway, the Wehrmacht tech structure splits in the middle, where you can choose a Luftwaffe company or a Panzergrenadier one. They're not mutually exclusive, but offer similar enough units, so you probably want to rush the final tier to start spamming medium tanks. A unique mechanic is being able to replace your grenadiers with the more specialized infantry from your battle group.
Assigning infantry to the rear. Jaeger will be available shortly.
Next up is the British forces. They're really fun. They have great call-ins and versatile mainline infantry. Giving 80 rifles to an infantry section will counter anything smaller than a tank. You can't skip any tech tier, but you could use Churchill call-ins instead of getting the last one. Also nice is their relatively early and non-doctrinal self-propelled howitzer and the rifle nades. Lots of options when it comes to late game tanks too. I'd recommend them for a beginner, they're solid and simple. The last faction is the Africa Corps. They have a lot of different vehicles. There's one for pretty much every role, and there's upgrades to give tanks more utility. There's even an upgrade that lets tanks capture points without any drawback. There's non-doctrinal mechanized call-ins that will bolster your army at a discount, but with a high cooldown. You can later replace these call-ins with manpower-only tank call-ins, including a Tiger. It's always fun to outmaneuver your opponents, but just because they can be fast, that doesn't mean their units are weak. The doctrinal Guastatori are probably the strongest anti-infantry squad in the game, for example. The 8 Rad is amazing at peppering squads, and the Panzer III is great in numbers. I'm really not a fan of their other doctrines though, especially the one with the Italian tanks. They might be cheap, but they are incredibly wimpy and die to a sneeze, while coming out very late compared to similarly performing vehicles. And speaking of, a couple of people have asked me to comment on how Italy is represented.
Did you hear what happened when the Italians joined the war? They were going to send 5 divisions to deal with them. Then someone pointed out they're on our side. So instead we sent 20 divisions.
Simply put, I'm perfectly happy with this.
You missed that one.
If I had to complain about one thing, it would be the way the resistance fighters are portrayed in the campaign. Specifically, the fact that partisans absolutely weren't a unified group under a single leadership. Some of them just wanted to kick the Germans out, and others wanted to kill everyone right off Stalin, sometimes including other partisans. But this is a Company of Heroes game, realistically it's the best way to portray them. Just wanted to mention it. 5 woman. Getting back on topic, to me none of the 4 factions feels unbalanced or out of place, so in that aspect the multiplayer gameplay of Company of Heroes 3 is already pretty fun. But this game needs some pretty serious patching. Pathfinding for both vehicles and infantry is pretty terrible. The game seems to forget some of your options like mouse clamping and the unit flag location, and not only when it crashes. Units also have a tendency to hit lower obstacles that are in the way of their target, which you might think it's intended, and maybe it is, but they also hit friendly mines pretty consistently. There's no way that's intended. Weapon indicators disappear if the unit is performing an animation that hides their weapon, and some dropped weapons have no name. Other than the bugs, there are some design choices that are just amateurish. Why is there scrolling description text when you have so much space to work with? Why did you make 2 very different units share the same name and icon? Why did you decide that when tanks get damaged they should get partially charred? Why are some units so much louder than others?
Mission accomplished. Let's get out of here.
So, Company of Heroes 3. Right now, people are hating on it similarly to how they hated Company of Heroes 2 at launch, but the game launched with more content and better monetization than the second game, meaning that it's already primed to eventually become better if they can smooth out the technical issues. I'm optimistic, but considering that this is a brand new engine, I don't know how long it's going to take. If you're interested in the single player, it's one 4 to 5 hours scripted campaign and a way longer one that's mostly skirmishes. And if you're looking for multiplayer, I think it's a fine baseline that plays pretty well. It's not as good as the second game if you already have all the factions and a lot of commanders, but if you have skipped it, I think Company of Heroes 3 is the better game to get into. It's just got more features and less microtransactions. Of course, if you haven't played any Company of Heroes in 12 years, the game won't compare to your nostalgia, but Company of Heroes 3 is by no means perfect. A lot of the complaints it's getting are completely warranted. Personally, I still enjoy the game despite the bugs. Keep in mind that this is a review of the launch state of Company of Heroes 3. It might get worse, it might get better. I think that in a year or two after some expansions have been released, I might revisit the game and do a full comparison like I did for the other 2 games. As of right now though, I'm just going to say that while the game is fun, for a lot of people Company of Heroes 3 might not be worth full price. We'll see if Relic can improve the game like they did with the second one. Thanks for watching. Panzer.